join us tonight for our October Hot Topics. Let me talk a little bit about Hot Topics. This has been going on for years with the League. And the Hot Topics are really programs that our committees put on to learn about issues that the committees have been looking into and studying. And that's one of the good things about the League of Women Voters. We study issues before we take positions on them. So we have several committees. Voter Services did the program on September Hot Topics about the constitutional amendments. So that was their committee's month. October is the Education Committee. I happen to chair that committee, so this is our month to put on a program. We also have a local government committee, a healthcare committee, climate change and sustainability, and a lobby corps that does lobbying when the legislature's in session. So each committee comes up with a program for the month that they're in charge of, and this is the month that we are doing something related to education and children. I've been asked by several people, let me go back and say our education programs over the years have been a lot of interesting topics. The last 2 years, we did a program on the resegregation of Leon County schools. And we discovered that Leon County has the most segregated school system in the state of Florida. So that was kind of shocking. So we did a program to learn more about that issue. And then last year we did a program at Hartsfield Elementary. We invited the community to come and talk about helping underperforming schools. So this month, in this year, we've been looking into the Children's Services Council, and we wanted to learn more about it. Now, I've had several calls and questions about why aren't you having an opposing speaker? Well, we did have an opposing speaker because we hosted a debate with the Tallahassee Democrat. We've been hosting forums for candidate forums and issues, and there was a debate where there were pro and con, for and against the Children's Services Council. So our purpose tonight is to invite a speaker from the commission that's been studying this issue for 18 months. And we will have, at the end of her presentation, I promised the people that are in opposition that I will ask some of their questions and get a response from our speaker. So we wanted to hear from a representative from this commission that's been looking into this issue. They had 18 months of meetings. They produced a 118-page report. They included, I looked through it, I didn't read it word for word, I will admit that. But they had a 31-page appendix with extensive list of current community organizations and gaps in services that are unmet needs. And I was really impressed with the people that were on this commission. And I would like to, I think it's important just to read who they were. They said that they tried to get a good representation of all the community and leaders. Judge Jonathan Sordrum was the Chief Judge of the Second Circuit Court, was the committee chair, and our speaker tonight, Manisha Brown, was the vice chair of the committee. So we're really glad to have her here to help us. And I'm just going to check and make sure I'm not leaving anybody else out here. So here's who was on the commission: Jack Campbell, state attorney; Jim Croteau, retired educator; John Daly, mayor of the city; Nancy Daniels, retired public defender; Tom Derzopolsky, a private business owner; Mimi Grand, director of FSU Center for Prevention and Early Intervention; Rocky Hanna, our school superintendent; Lila Jaber from the Gunster Law Firm; David Kirk, Network of Entrepreneurs and Business Advocates; Nisha Little, Department of Children and Families, Operations Manager; Alma Littles, MD, Senior Associate Dean at the FSU College of Medicine; Derek McGee, local pastor and lobbyist; Walt McNeil, our sheriff; Rick Miner, Leon County Commissioner; Mark O'Brien, president of Tallahassee Memorial Healthcare, and past president of the Tallahassee Chamber of Commerce; Jay Reeve, president of the Appalachie Center; Walter Sachs, Department of Children and Families Administrator; Lou Shelley, an attorney; Alva Striplin, a school board member; Steve Ufelder, attorney; and Kim Williams, private business owner. So the list of people that served on this commission to come up with their report was quite extensive, and I thought it was important that you heard who was involved with this plan to put together a Children's Services Council. Now, as I said, at the end of our speaker's presentation, I will ask some questions that came to me from the opponents of the CSC. And I would also encourage you who are listening to write your questions in the chat box. And after I give the speaker a chance to respond to the opponent's questions, then we'll open it up for your questions and comments, and we would appreciate your input. So, with that being said, let's proceed to meet our speaker. Our guest speaker is Manisha Brown. She served as vice chair of the Leon County Children's Services Council Planning Committee for its duration of 18 months. She was a member of the Early Learning Coalition of the Big Bend for 10 years, serving as chairwoman for 6. Ms. Brown worked for the state of Florida in several capacities, including general counsel to the Department of Management Services. She was Director of Legislative Affairs and Chief Cabinet Aide to the Attorney General, and concluded her public service as Director of the Agency for Workforce Innovation, Florida's labor agency. And she currently serves as Director of Public Affairs and Government Relations for Walmart. I told her she's had quite an interesting career. And she's a graduate of the University of Wisconsin Law School and Illinois State University with a degree in English. And she's a member of the Florida and Wisconsin Bar Associations. So Manisha, we are really pleased that you're able to join us tonight and give us Children's Services Council 101. So I turn it over to you, and we're going to try to see if we can share. Erin Edwards is going to try to share her screen to share your slides. But if that doesn't work, we'll just listen to your talk. So Manisha, I turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sally. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, first and foremost, thank you from all of you, for being here tonight. I know our evenings are more precious than ever these days, and I appreciate you taking the time to learn about the Children's Services Council and what we think and truly believe can be done in our community. As Sally mentioned, I was on the planning committee for the Children's Services Council, and really think that it helps to have a clear understanding of what the Children's Services Council Planning Committee was all about. So it started with a county commission vote to put this initiative on the ballot this year. And as part of that decision, they asked that a planning committee be created for the primary purpose of evaluating whether a Children's Services Council would fit in our community and provide a benefit to our community. We met as a group, the group that Sally just outlined. It's hard to believe it's been a year since we all met. We spent a lot of time together, and it was a fantastic opportunity, not just for us to get to know each other and learn more about our community and the needs in our community, but as we spent hours listening to various nonprofit groups, we learned about where they're focusing in our community on our children and where the gap exists. And I think for many of us, it was very enlightening. Learning about the health needs and premature birth and how that's impacting our kids well beyond the first years of their lives, but truly for their entirety of their lives. Learning about the mental health state of many of the children in our community that goes across our community, not just in one particular zip code or one area of the county, but truly across the county. There's some significant needs from a mental health perspective. And we learned a lot about that. And then, of course, with the sheriff and the state attorney, we also learned a lot about some of the juvenile justice challenges and just crime in our community. So we spent time learning about those areas and many others, but those were the 3 areas that really bubble to the top in terms of being high priority areas. And as I said, we listened to a lot of our nonprofit organizations as they talked about what the community needs are. And then we worked with 3 consultants who are in their own right PhDs and experts in child development. And they helped us put together the report that Sally referenced and help us really kind of fine tune what we believe the benefits are. And while this vote was not unanimous, it was certainly overwhelmingly supported that we encourage our community to support a Children's Services Council. So the planning committee, as Sally mentioned, was made up of quite a diverse group of people, but again, intended to mirror what the actual Children's Services Council membership would look like. Specifically, the statute identifies which positions that are currently elected officials will be seated on the Children's Services Council. Those include the superintendent of schools, a school board member, a county commissioner, as well as the Department of Children and Families regional director and the chief judge. And in this case, John Scherstrom is the chief judge of the juvenile division. So he was happy to serve and I think provided us with just incredible insight. So that's what the planning committee was all about. And as Sally mentioned, that report is available for everyone. I have to admit, I haven't read the whole thing in a long time, so I'm not as well versed on all the details, but we did spend hours putting it together and fine tuning it to make sure that the community had something to go to as a resource to understand why we all agreed that a Children's Services Council could be something pretty phenomenal for us. So kind of shifting gears, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about some of the reasons why we thought and believe that a Children's Services Council can make a huge difference. These are designated resources for children in the community. There is no, the resources come from obviously our community members, our citizens, and we contribute to this designated fund to support children's issues. The Children's Services Council, once they're seated, they will develop a needs assessment and likely come back to you with the same 3 priority areas and maybe others that I've just outlined. But they have a report out to the community. And once they develop the priorities for the community, those dollars will be designated for the purpose of supporting children in those areas. These are not dollars meant to supplant any existing dollars. These are truly to supplement existing either programs or innovative programs, new programs that might be created to help support our children. I think one of the areas that's always been pretty interesting to me is when we talk to and listen to Sheriff Walt McNeil talk about juvenile crime in our community. One thing that he said that really stuck out to me that I go back to in my mind is that the current way that we are supporting children and dealing with juvenile crime is not sustainable. That we have to do something and we have to get to our children earlier. We have to get them ready for school. We have to support their families early so their families are helping them learn how to read. We want those parents who may struggle with access to health care and access to prenatal care to have those resources available to them, because we know that those things can truly impact the future of those children. As I look at it in my work with the Early Learning Coalition, we all know that 80% of the brain is developed by the age of 3. So if you can imagine, when we have children that are already born premature, they're already starting with a deficit. And so being able to designate and work closely with, designate dollars and work closely with programs that are going to help those parents be better parents and help hopefully alleviate, but certainly support the reduction in premature births, we know that we can make a difference so that those children are ready, are coming out, they're vibrant, they're able to learn, and we can make sure that by the age of 3, they're on the right track. There's a lot of data, and we certainly talked about many issues related to children, early childhood development that can impact their likelihood of success. But what I think is important is that we are mindful of the fact that in other communities, and this is one of the areas that as the planning committee was able to talk about our needs, we were able to bring in some of the executive directors of the Children's Services Councils around the state. And when they looked at their needs in their community, which don't mirror ours exactly, obviously Leon County is different, but they were able to look at and measure where they were on certain issues. So if you take kindergarten readiness, they were able to implement programs or put resources into programs that would increase the percentage of school readiness in their community. They looked at, in some cases, teenage pregnancy. And again, they identified where they were on the scale, and they put resources towards supporting programs that would help reduce teenage pregnancy and so forth. So we know that the Children's Services Councils, which by the way are throughout the state, I think we have 8 existing today, many of them have been in place for years. They have been able to show that the work that they've done and the resources that they've put behind these programs are truly making a difference in their community. Sally, I want to just stop there for a second and see if you have any questions or anything that you want to add, just to pause. Sally, can you hear me? You might be on mute.
Oh, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yes, can you talk a little bit more about specific programs? I think one of the things the community was hoping was that there would be specific programs identified that the council would be focusing on and funding. So can you talk about that a little bit? What did your commission decide about which programs and what's going to be on the top of the list?
Sure, sure. So just a couple of data points for you to have in your back pocket. We know that 23 out of 100 children in Leon County live in poverty. We've seen the rates of infant deaths and low birth weights. And we know that in Leon County, our rates exceed the state rates. We also know that when it comes to children being ready for school and school readiness, that 47% of children are not ready for kindergarten. And those of you who are educators know this, but I always found this to be an incredible data point, that before 3rd grade, children learn to read, but at 3rd grade, they read to learn. So if our children aren't prepared to read by the 3rd grade, they're already behind. And there is no going back to refresh them and help them catch up. The school keeps going. So, and then the one other area that I think is really important as another data point is that the mental health for adolescents. We know that hospitalizations for self-inflicted injuries for teens are almost double the state rate in Leon County. And some of you may also be aware of this, but I know by virtue of some of the work that I'm doing that because of the COVID-19, we know that the stress that is on children in high school, college is just extraordinary. And that many of them are expressing feelings of anxiety and frustration and just obviously concern for their own health, concern for their family's health, and concern about their future. So those are three areas that I mentioned to you because those really kind of highlight the three areas that we identified with the most need. First, starting with premature births. That really became one of the areas that we saw that we know we can make a difference and that will make a long-term impact on those children as well as our communities. Second is the school readiness and really making sure that our children are ready to learn when they go into school. We know that a lot of children who are faced with poverty are struggling every day, and getting to school may be like the biggest challenge for them. Or we may see it as the biggest challenge, but their biggest challenge may be getting a meal that day or getting a night's sleep where they feel safe and secure. And recognizing that there are children in our community who are faced with those challenges every day and may not have parents that are there for them or know how to support them. We believe that that's an area that we can certainly tackle and better support those families. And then third is the mental health. We know that, as I mentioned, mental health is increasingly a challenge for our adolescents. And we know that they are turning to negative ways to cope with these challenging circumstances. And listen, we all know this is a challenging time for all of us as adults, but imagine a teenager that's already dealing with so many issues, trying to figure out how to cope with something like this pandemic, or not being able to socialize, or feeling isolated. And I'm sorry, there was another, that's juvenile crime. And juvenile crime, as I mentioned, is something that we all recognize is happening in our community. I remember State Attorney Jack Campbell said the percentage of the juvenile crime, if you take 100% of the juvenile crime, there's a very small minority who are committing that crime. But if we are able to address those issues with that group early, we can start reducing the number of folks who are engaged in bad behavior and bad activity. And again, recognizing that in some cases it's truly environmental. To the extent that we can start impacting the environment that these children are in, we know that we can make a positive outcome. So those are really the primary areas that we identified, but just know that this was, again, a mirror Children's Services Council. This is not the Children's Services Council. And once those individuals are seated, they will have the opportunity to evaluate the needs. And we know, I mean, we didn't predict this pandemic, so who knows what else could be on the list by the time we get to next year and that group coming together. But they will do an official needs assessment and again, report back to the community, take community input, and then identify the priorities that they think are most important for Leon County.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I should, we're about halfway through till it's about 6:30. So why don't I just go into some of the opponents' questions and you can respond to these. And I think the biggest, in summary, what I got out of the opponents was, why now? You know, why raise taxes in the midst of a pandemic? And that rental properties will be especially hard hit, which will affect rents for low-income people. And why can't the commissioners just use their existing budgets instead of having to have a whole new tax put on the citizens, especially at this time? So what's your response to that?
I think that's a great question, and I'm certainly very empathetic to that. As we have talked about the needs of our community, we know that now more than ever, our children need us. And if there was ever a time for this community to step up and do more, I believe this pandemic has shown that poverty is only increasing. Mental health issues are only increasing. And we know that crime is increasing. I mean, these are all, I mean, you guys probably, ladies, gentlemen, know yourselves how schools are doing or how your community is doing. But the data is rich in terms of how this pandemic is impacting our communities. So from our perspective, as advocates for the Children's Services Council, we believe now more than ever we need to stand together and commit to investing in the future, and that doing so now has the ability to, reduce domestic abuse and support food security so that many of these children can get to school and stay busy and focused in an environment that is supportive versus retreating and developing greater learning gaps and just creating more challenges for them.
Okay.
I think you mentioned, what about being able to do it now versus, why not do it with our existing resources? And the fact of the matter is, from my perspective, I've been in Tallahassee for 20 years. Number one, I've never been part of something that is so diverse in terms of community support. We have just every segment of our community that's impacted by our children is represented and has come to the table supporting us. We've got the Tallahassee Chamber, we've got the Big Bend Minority Chamber, the Capital City Chamber, the United Way of the Big Bend. And we know that with all of these resources, we know that there are a lot of organizations doing some really great things, but they will tell you that more resources are needed and more support is needed. And so I think it's just important to highlight that if we could do more, there are certainly organizations and people committed to do more. We just don't have the resources to do better. And we know that the Children's Services Council can make a difference.
Okay. The next concern of the opponents is, again, just a general, why was there no budget? And particularly, there's concern about limits on administrative overhead, capital outlay. There's concern that this could be just a way for people to get jobs. For example, one opponent contacted me and said there was a rumor that they were going to establish an executive director's position for one of the commissioner's wives at a $250,000 salary. So would you like to respond to those kind of concerns?
Sure. I think we all, I think we're all professionals and adults, and we know how there are always bad apples. But the fact of the matter is that does not make this a bad cause. I think it's an unfair distortion to suggest that, we're throwing money against the wall to see what sticks, when the reality is the money is designated for a particular cause, and there is sufficient oversight. The Board of County Commission has oversight. Those elected officials that I mentioned earlier participate in this process, who are clearly already accountable to our community. There are others who will be on the Children's Services Council that are appointed by the governor. I personally believe that, having the voters choose who should be making decisions on the spending is an appropriate way to move forward. And I think that I firmly believe that this system that exists has already been tried and true. If you look at those other communities, they've instituted the Children's Services Council. And when the council has come back for reauthorization, the voters have overwhelmingly supported bringing that group back. So the idea that there might be a bad actor or that there's an underlying malicious intent, I think just is a way to take the eye off the ball of what we can do that's positive for our children and for our community.
Okay. As I said, I've got a few more questions that I've compiled from the opponents who contacted me, and then we'll go to your chat questions. I see we have a few coming in. The next thing the opponents asked about is, why didn't the report talk about how much is already being spent now, the aggregate spending on children's services? And how do we know we need more funding? And how do we know we won't be just duplicating services? So how do you respond to that?
Sure. I think that is a great question. We know that there are resources being spent in our community. I think that's pretty much a given. And if you talk to any of the nonprofits, they'll tell you that they are spending every dollar they can to support our community. And while, you know, there was an effort made to bring in those nonprofit organizations and hear what the services are and to understand the budget, you know, we did the best that we could to take an inventory of the children's services being provided in this community. But we also believe that there are gaps. And that's what we learned about as we went through the process. And we just disagree fundamentally that there's this extraordinary, you know, pot of money that's out there that's already being used to make a positive impact. For example, we know that more money, the second harvest, means more children who have meals on the weekends for breakfast and dinners and during the summer. And since the pandemic, we know that children are eating less and having less access to food, and therefore that's impacting their success in school. You know, I think there's a $200 million figure that's been floating around, that those are the resources that are already being spent on children. We've not been able to verify that, but I think if you look at the reports that are attached to the Children's Services Council planning report, we took real live community county data. We looked at Department of Health data for you know, the low birth weights. We looked at other juvenile statewide data to come up with the information to support juvenile crime as a priority. So we believe that there is enough information out there to show that, number one, if you ask, those organizations will tell you there's a need. So I always say, don't take my word for it. Call your Early Learning Coalition, call the Second Harvest, call the organizations that you're part of, and ask them about how they feel additional resources could be used to support children in our community. And we think that an apples to apples comparison will give you far more of an accurate understanding of where the resources lie and where the resources are needed.
Okay, thank you. All right, a couple more. What about effectiveness data? You know, how will you know that whether programs that you're funding are effective? And
fantastic. Oh, yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
Was there more to that question?
No, that's essentially what it is.
Okay, that's a fantastic question. And frankly, that is one of the reasons why I am personally very passionate about the Children's Services Council. So when I was part of the Early Learning Coalition, we had an opportunity to work with children's services councils and understand how they play a role in other communities. And we learned that, you know, if you have a community that has a children's services council, they devote a lot of resources to early education. We obviously did not have that in Leon County, but I believe we did the best that we could without it. In my professional life, I have had the opportunity to assess the Children's Services Council and designate foundation resources across the state to some of the initiatives that they are engaging in. And what I always go back to and share with everyone that most impressed me is that they not only identify programs, they measure where those issues exist in their community today, and they measure the impact of investing resources in the community. So for example, if we look at mental health in Leon County, we will know as a baseline where we stand. And then the Children's Services Council, if they implement a program to address mental health, they will provide an annual report specifically outlining how those dollars were used to support mental health, as well as what our figures look like as a result of that investment. And from a private sector perspective, I'm just mostly excited about having designated resources that we can track and that we can measure the outcomes and report back to the community. And as many of you know, working in government, oftentimes we know that money is going to a particular cause, but we don't know if we're making an impact, and we don't know if those dollars are being utilized to the best, most efficient benefit. But Children's Services Councils actually provide exactly that. And having that annual accountability, to me, is a critical component of the program.
Okay. Thank you. We got two more coming from the opponent questions. And the next one is about accountability. How will the CSC be accountable to voters? And the concern is the majority of members are appointed by the governor. And so there's no way for voters to remove people unless that, I think in 12 years it comes up again for a vote to reauthorize it. But what do you say about the concern about the accountability issue? How are the voters accountable? They were
So
accountable.
yes, ma'am. I believe that the voters are absolutely have the ability to hold this group accountable. First, 4 of the 10 will be locally elected officials. So the public will have the opportunity every 2 years to voice its support or opposition regarding the CSE, just like with the city or county commission or the school board. And I mentioned those folks. You have 1 representative from DCF, that's statutorily required. And then 5 people are nominated by the county commission. And these will be local community volunteers. And the statute requires that the council members be demographically diverse. Second, the citizens have the opportunity every 12 years to vote up or down the CSC. So just like this ballot initiative, automatically in 12 years, this will be back on the ballot. And as I mentioned, in other communities, they have been able to overwhelmingly pass the Children's Services Council for reauthorization. So we know that is a system that has worked and is tried and true. Third, at any time, if there's a concern about the performance of the Children's Services Council, the county commission can put it back on the ballot and give the voters the opportunity to disband the Children's Services Council. In the counties around the state that have a CSC, the voters have been given an opportunity. They have overwhelmingly supported, and that continues to be consistent across the state. And then lastly, regarding the governor's role, I mean, the governor has the ability to appoint 5 members to this group. And we know that the governor in his appointments process does a very thorough job in evaluating each member. And should there be some issue, the governor has the ability to remove an individual from that appointment. But those members that are appointed, there will be 3 people recommended by the county commission for each of those 5 seats. So 15 people total.
Okay, and the final concern that some people have seen, it looks like the report focuses primarily on early childhood programs, birth to 5 years old. What about juvenile crime and gun violence, teen suicide, teen pregnancy? Is it true that the Children's Services Council will only be focusing on early childhood, or are these other issues also on the table? How do you respond?
It is. Those other issues are 100% on the table. So out of our report, we identified mental health, adolescent mental health, juvenile crime, and early childhood development, which encompassed from pre-birth to 5. So yes, all of those items are on the table. And as I mentioned before, when that needs assessment comes into play, when the Children's Services Council has actually stood up, we may determine that there are new needs or additional needs that the coronavirus impact has created. So the good news is we will have a chance to look at our needs based on what our community looks like, and everything is on the table. They're just designated resources to children.
Okay, very good. Okay, well now I'm going to go open up the chat box and see what we have here from our participants. Kathy says, looks like we need to help families afford preschool childcare. Can the funds be used to fund slots in the subsidized childcare program?
Very good question. So if you think of it this way, the School Readiness is a program to help families and support them in their efforts for childcare, to cover childcare costs. These dollars cannot be used to supplant those dollars. So if you have a mom who is able to get school readiness dollars, we're not the way that this program works, you can't take that mom and say, well, instead of you getting the school readiness dollars from the state and federal government, we're going to give you children's services dollars. That's not how this works. If you take that mom and let's say she has school readiness dollars and that's not enough to cover the cost of her childcare, we can develop a program to help support families in the childcare area, but they cannot be used to supplement or supplant. I'm sorry. They can be used to supplement, cannot be used to supplant.
Okay. Here's a question from Penny. Why wasn't the most recent data used for the report instead of 4-year-old data?
Fantastic question. Well, so when the Board of County Commission voted to put this on the ballot, they put it on the ballot, I believe, 3 years out. So the data that we had was the most current data when we were going through the evaluation process. And as you mentioned, Sally, that was an 18-month process that ended last year. So we met every 2 months for the most part for the better part of 2018 and 2019, and then submitted the report to the County Commission in December of 2019. And so here we are, the item just coming before you on the ballot in 2020.
Okay. Okay, here's one from Kathy. Won't the pandemic likely be over before taxes are levied for the CSC? Who knows?
If only,
Yeah,
if only I knew. Yeah. I certainly hope so. But I think we're in an environment where there are a lot of unknowns, and it will take time for the Children's Services Council to be stood up, to get those appointees to get running. So hopefully the pandemic will be over and we will be in a position to evaluate what the needs are and assess the amount that best suits our needs in our community.
Okay. Here's another one from Penny who says, the Board of County Commissioners have absolutely no say in the budget of the CSC. That is just not a true statement that was just made. The council has sole discretion of how those funds are spent. So do you agree with that? The council has
Yes,
the
but yes, and remember, there is a county commissioner that is assigned to the Children's Services Council.
Okay.
And also remember that the Board of County Commission at any point can decide that the CSC is not meeting its needs and put it back on the ballot for a vote of the community.
Okay. Penny's got a whole lot of questions here. I think many of them were covered in the questions that I asked. She has a question. What new ideas did the planning committee come up with? How many more children will be served?
That's a great question. I think I can only speak for my recollection in terms of new ideas. I'm not sure that anyone would say that there were new ideas or new programs necessarily that we evaluated and made a recommendation for, because that really isn't our role. Our role, we had a very specific purpose to determine if we thought a Children's Services Council would benefit this community and whether we would recommend it. I think that there were definitely organizations that presented ideas of where they saw the gaps and how they would address the gaps if they had additional resources. But I don't know that there was a particular program that comes to mind today that I think is something that's innovative. But I will say that from a private sector person who's also been in government and worked on children's issues, I learned a lot about the needs in our community. I think the piece that was most fascinating to me as a mom of 2 boys, one who's a sophomore in high school and one who just started his freshman year at FSU, is that the mental health issues are extraordinary. And there's not a lot of conversation about it naturally because of the stigma associated with mental health. But when you hear from Jay Reeves from Appalachia Center and some of our educators about what's happening to our children in these schools, you recognize that there's a whole area of support that we really have to take seriously and really effectively start working to try to make a difference for those teenagers. So to me, that's a place where I wouldn't necessarily say it's a new idea or new area, but it's one that isn't largely discussed, but certainly a priority.
Thank you. You know, I have to just put in a personal plug here because my whole career was director of the Institute for School Innovation. And we came up with new ways of teaching children, especially in elementary school and also middle school. And it's really hard to be innovative because just going back to the question about effectiveness, because if you're trying something new that's never been done before, you don't yet have any effectiveness data. So we tend to just kind of keep doing the same thing over and over. So I'm hopeful that there will be opportunities for innovation and people to come up with completely new ideas, because clearly what we've been doing has a lot left to help. We have a lot of problems in our community. I think at this point, I'm going to let you, do you want to just do a wrap-up statement here? I think we've pretty much covered the concerns. I know the opponent still, we've got some good things to think about, whether to vote for or against this thing. Obviously, it's going to raise our taxes. There's a lot of questions that haven't been answered. But I guess the point that we have to, are we going to take a risk and just move forward, or are we going to say, no, this isn't the right time? So it's really up to you voters. And I think this has been very helpful and informative. And I thank you so much for taking time to speak with us. Do you have any closing remarks, Manisha?
Well, the only thing that I will say we didn't talk about is the funding itself. And Sally, I just want to take this opportunity to explain it, because I think sometimes there's a lot of misinformation about what the financial impact is on our community. And I'm not an advocate for increasing taxes. I look at this very conservatively when it comes to spending my money and talking about spending other people's money. So this is an important area that I just want to highlight. When people talk about how much the financial impact is on an individual, the way that it works is the millage rate is established annually up to 0.5 mils on property values. This is up to a half penny per 1,000. So what does that mean? A home worth $100,000 will pay $50 per year. This is homeowners. And a homeowner that has $1 million would pay an additional $500 per year. This amounts to an annual budget of up to $8 million, which is what is expected to be generated on an annual basis. And what I also think is important about that is these are long-term investments. As probably many of you know, when we're talking about nonprofit funding or government funding, we know that those resources are constantly dwindling. We know that they are short-term use in some cases, very limited use in many cases. But this gives us a funding stream to not only think about today, but the future, and putting together a plan that we can actually invest and track the success and ensure that we're making good decisions every year going into programs that matter and that make a difference. So I would just leave you with, I think there's a lot of reasons. There's always a lot of reasons to do nothing, or to talk about why this is, something like this is a bad idea. But I think when you look around and think about what the impacts can be on our community, if you're concerned about juvenile crime, and frankly, crime altogether, if you're concerned about our schools and we want to be in a community where we have, schools that are A+ and A and B schools, these are the kind of programs that actually make a difference and can help get our children on the right path early. We know that if we make positive impacts in their lives during their education program, if they're able to read at 3rd grade, then we build less prisons. If they're able to communicate and go to school and focus on education as they enter high school, they're more likely to focus on their career and be prepared for the workforce when they graduate. And we're not talking about just making sure that they graduate and have a degree or go get a college degree, but truly, can we graduate people who are going to be positive members of our community? All of these things, all of these investments early ultimately impact how that individual will become a citizen that is engaged in their community, who is communicating in their community in a way that is positive, making a difference, and also supportive of that community. And those are the economic impacts that I think we all have to remember. It starts early, and this is a program that will help us start early in those investments. So thank you for taking the time. Obviously, I'm happy to answer any additional questions, but certainly recommend that if you have questions, you go to ourkidsfirst-leon.com to learn more about the programs, and certainly encourage you to vote yes in November.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing your expertise. I have recorded this session, so it will be on our website for those that weren't able to attend in person. And the report itself, there is a link to the report that we'll put out for you so you can read the whole report if you feel so inclined. But again, thank you so much, Manisha, for your input. Thanks for those of you that gave questions, and the opponents' questions I think were very insightful, and we have a lot to think about. But my own personal opinion is you pay me now or you pay me later with the kids. It's a matter of investment. And the other thing that comes to my mind is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Absolutely.
Because as an educator and as a person who's lived in this community, raised my children here, we have huge problems with our children and we need help. So that's my personal opinion. The league has not taken a position. I'm going to be talking to my education committee members, especially those that were on this call tonight, and we will discuss it further and maybe put forth some recommendations. So thank you, everybody. Good night. It's good to have you here. And our next hot topics will be in November, and we're in the process. The next committee will be working on a topic. So thanks for attending, and I say good night and drive safely, Manisha. Good night.